Here we are in our next episode of Next in Leadership, the interview. We have Michelle Hurt here, who I've gotten to know over the last couple of years, and I'm excited to have her share her story so that we can all learn from it and hopefully adopt some of those leadership principles she's picked up along her journey. And so, Michelle, thank you for joining us. And the first question I have for you is kind of tell us your early leadership journey where you might have seen some early traits in your life that the audience would relate to.
Yeah, well, the biggest one started with my family. So I noticed leadership right away from my father. And my dad was a military man. He was a
Mm.
Marine. He was a Semper Fi all the way. So I got to witness my dad not only lead within our home, but lead as an operations manager for Lambert Airport, which is St. Louis. He worked for Ozark, TWA, and American Airlines, and he was under lots of people. But his leadership skills that I watched over the years, obviously I picked up along the way, and I wanted to eliminate those, which the biggest one was integrity and his work ethic.
Mm.
And I think for me, I have been able to have today in today's world work ethic. I'm pretty nonstop. So I learned that from him to never give up, to keep going. And I just learned so much from my dad along the way. And then another one for me growing up was playing sports. So sports was huge for me. And I know a lot of people can relate to sports. I wasn't necessarily a leader, but I ended up adapting and becoming a leader on the team. I played soccer, I played goalie, and I played fullback, which was the sweeper. And my responsibility was protection. And so with that came some leadership skills and some rah-rah skills along the way that I just naturally picked up. And then finally, in my younger years, when I said yes to Jesus and rededicated my life to Christ, I became a youth leader.
Mm.
And youth leadership threw me into a whole different gamut because I was leading junior high. That was my heart, that was my passion. I loved junior high. They were so open and susceptible to testimonies and the gospel. So I had to really equip myself. But having that responsibility of leading kids held me accountable. I had to fine tune my leadership skills and keep my authentic self as a believer and as a person true to check. So those are the top three.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. First, I think, leadership, it's great that you had a great model for a leader in the home because I think so many homes don't necessarily have that. And sometimes
Mhm.
we think of leadership in a negative light, even as we see it publicly and externally. And then there's a couple of things that you said in there integrity and hard work. I think we don't
Yes.
necessarily attribute those to leadership now. Right? We think of, oh, if they're the leader, they don't have to do anything, right? And
Not
integrity
true.
only circumstantially, right? If it
Right.
leverages integrity circumstantially, then okay. Otherwise, take advantage of every opportunity, right? And so I think that's great. You saw great leadership modeled in your home.
Mhm.
And then, the part my daughter played soccer as well. And so I know that fullback and goalie, the benefit of that role is you see the whole field.
Yes.
Right, and you see the whole thing developing, and, I was, as I was coaching my oldest daughter, I was teaching the goalie, and the goalie has to be prepared for everything because, wait for the pass, know where to be, and you gotta guard the whole goal, and so some of that leadership is seeing the whole field as an early stage, and
Yes.
then, of course, I always say, leadership is accountability, right, and junior hires will they don't necessarily know what not to comment on, and so as you're leading a junior hire, they're going to ask you questions, but, I think one, if they see that you're not leading with authenticity or integrity, they're going to call you out on
Mhm.
that. Like, hey, you're a
1,000%.
hypocrite. Number one. Number two is, they're susceptible to challenges from anywhere else. I told my kids early on, and I'm sure you were the same, is saying, hey, someone's deciding what to do. And so it's either you or a
Yep.
peer in junior high that's going to lead you down the wrong path. And so, they're looking for people of influence. And thank you for stepping into that role because I know it's a difficult role, leading junior hires as I now have one going to high school as well. So I completely understand that. Well, each of those leadership journeys are distinctly different, but I think inherently,
Yes.
one, you had leadership modeled in front of you, which helped you appeal to leadership. Two, I think ultimately you had an opportunity to then serve in a leadership capacity in the
Mhm.
other side. But where are maybe some insights that you've adopted over the time that helped you lead yourself well as you stepped into these leadership role that really helped you propel your career forward? So there's any key highlights of when you started leading yourself, knowing that's where it started, that
Mhm.
led to your journey as it continued?
Well, the biggest one is I worked full time until I met my husband, and then he took me all over the country as we climbed the corporate ladder. And so, with that came a new responsibility and a new role as a leader, and that was a stay at home mom.
Mhm.
And in that role became a whole different thing. You know, it's working outside the home and being inside the home. I think being a stay at home mom is one of the biggest leadership roles that I've ever taken on. But what that did was it led me into volunteering at the schools, which led me to PTO president. I was room mom, and I became this leader, lo and behold, not by choice, but well, I guess it was by choice, but it was just setting the stage for me because if you look at today, I truly believe that God was just preparing me. Um, I'm in development today. I'm in fundraising. I'm in community partnerships and all the things. Well, I was doing that almost 17 years ago as a room mom. And I would say don't underestimate volunteering at your children's school. There are so many things that I learned along the way that helped me redefine who I am as a woman, as a mom, and of course, as a leader. And so those two roles are kind of off the grid when you're talking, but maybe not necessarily. But those things really help shape me and force me again to be accountable and just to be true to who I am to myself. Never wavering in my faith, always being open about that. But yeah, that's kind of a different leadership role, but it's an important one.
Absolutely, and my wife stays at home, and that's super critical. She has a harder job than I do for sure. I mean, you're from janitor to cook to Uber driver to,
Yes.
any number of roles that are otherwise their home leader. I say, that's where I go home, and I'm the associate. I'm like, hey, what do you need done? And so we understand that role. And I think, one of those things is that's long-term leadership, right? You're
Mhm.
starting with a child and they have long-term leadership, and you can see the effects of your leadership over time. And I think that's something that's overlooked. I mean, in a career, as yours, it sounds like 3 to 5 years, you stepped into this role of mother.
Yeah.
That's shorter term. We have the opportunity to leave our jobs. We don't have the opportunity necessarily to leave our kids. I mean, there's days where they need a timeout or we need time away. Either one,
Peace
what I
out.
mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, we take a break, and so I think that's
You can't
you
even
see
hide
the.
in the bathroom.
I know they'll find you. They're really adept at doing that.
Yes.
They think it's hide and go seek. They do it fun, But
Yes.
ultimately, I think that's exactly right. You have to learn to lead and that long term investment. I think on the other side is, and people underestimate the difficulty of philanthropic leadership because
Yes.
in a business they might be coming to buy the product, right? If you come to our organization, you have an interest in the product, and our job is to orient your interest into that. But in a philanthropic thing, especially one I know you guys have started and built, you're generating interest on your own, right? You're saying, hey, this is an idea, and really what does it teach you is the power of passion and clear communication,
And I
right? They
would
have to
say that is the
understand.
number one thing is passion
Mhm.
because I have genuine passion. Even when I was still doing room mom stuff, again, preparing me for what God has us doing now, which we'll talk about soon, but it absolutely molded me into the leader and having passion because obviously I had passion for my children and that they would have a grounded community for them, whether we were in Alabama, Georgia, St. Louis, New York. I was still trying to find a common ground. And I knew that I could be that, I don't know, stable leader within the home, but also bringing that to the school was huge. And so now that I'm in development and community leadership, the biggest thing that drives me, people always say, how did you even know how to fundraise? How did you even know how to do this? And honestly, I just speak from the heart. I'm super passionate. And that would be my number one thing. Be passionate about what you do. And if you're
Mhm.
not, then I would re examine your heart and your intentions on why you said yes to that, either job or project or philanthropic thing that you're
Yeah,
wanting
and
to
I
do.
think many times we don't know what to do, and so we just default. Like, what is someone
Mhm.
else doing, or what have I seen done already? Instead of, to your point, is what are we passionate about? And I think sometimes we get super specific with our passion. I mean, I'm sure you're passionate about being a stay-at-home mom. You're passionate about, being a wife,
Mhm.
supporting that, and the ministry that you're involved in, all these other steps that you're involved in. The passion was inherent to who you were, not that there's a circumstance. And so then you're saying, okay, if I'm passionate, what can I circumstantially apply that to? Right. And
Mhm.
really, as I look at that throughput of even being a junior high leader, it's the next generation developing or having an impact, serving ultimately in that case. And that's kind of the throughput of where that's at. And so now that we've you really honed in on that passion as a key driver of your leadership and
Hmm.
something you earned and learned in other areas, what do you really when you stepped into leading others, what's an example of where you started leading others, and as you began to lead others, that passion came through, and really you saw the next stage of your leadership journey? And what are some nuggets you can impart on our audience?
Oh my gosh, the biggest one I learned is communication. It's so crucial, and knowing your role. I would
Mm,
definitely say knowing your role. And then for me, I have learned through my leadership, I am all about leading with encouragement, and
mm,
then also being willing to do everything that I'm asking that person to do. So, for instance, Chariots for Hope, we exist to
mm,
demonstrate God's love by removing transportation barriers. So, it's all about cars and people and sharing the gospel in a unique way. I have picked up cars. I have detailed cars. I have met with clients that are just down and out and broken. I've met with people that are mega entrepreneurs. The radius is all over, and I've done every position, right? So I feel like that has given me an insight of just understanding the people I'm leading on our team. Hey, I've been there. I get you. I totally feel you. I can work through this with you because I've experienced myself. So I guess it just goes back to, for me, number one, communication is clear, roles are defined. And then for me, I'm just all about relational, being true to who I am and being, hey, I get you, I feel you, let's walk through this together. And not, I guess it's just leading with a humble heart. I
mm.
really feel like God has humbled me in so many ways. He has saved me from a really wretched past. I've made really bad decisions, and now that He's given me this second chance, I think that's why I just have, not only for the people that we employ, but for the people we serve, that I'm all about comeback stories and just believing in people and seeing the best in people. Um, what an opportunity, whether it's leading people that we serve or leading staff. And so I hope that answered the question. I think it
Yeah,
did.
for sure. I think one, that passion, you're like, how do I leverage that? Right. And I think
Yeah.
communication is critical, right? You can be passionate, but you can't communicate what you're passionate about. So I think it's consistent, clear, right? I've been in environments where you've been leading and it's your communication is clear and consistent. And that is super powerful as you're leading others. And then in addition to that is having empathy, right? And I think that's something I've seen, you're super empathetic. And some of that
Mm.
is, how do we develop empathy? Well, we do the work, right? We have more empathy when we've experienced it, and you've experienced the struggles, it sounds like, but you've
Yes.
also experienced the work you're empathizing with. Is, hey, I've been there detailing a car on a hot day, right? I mean, I've been there in the wrong spot doing the wrong things, and so you can empathize with them. And that we lose sight of, these are the tools that a key leader has, is the ability to communicate, leverage
Hmm.
that passion. You could be a cheerleader on the side, and sometimes we can't hear what they're saying, even their encourager, but your encouragement is specific in alignment with your passion and leveraging empathy. And, goes back to tying those pieces together. And I think that's what generates interest and resonates, is when you're doing that. And these seem like such subtle, basic things, but there's people that have passion, but they can't communicate and they don't have empathy. There's people that have empathy, but they don't have any direction or can't communicate that empathy. And there's people that can communicate, but it's not authentic or empathetic. And so it's
Yeah.
really pulling the three of those things together that has led to your success. And so your organization continues to grow, and you've had huge impact even locally. I've watched it. I've seen lives materially changed, right? I always talk about,
Yes.
communication can be transformational. And what is transformational? It's a moment in time that truly changes our future, that
Mhm.
forever, right? It's not just transactional, which it's an exchange, or it's not just informational things it's good to know. It's transformational. And so, you're in a philanthropic organization that is transformational, and you built on top of that journey, right? From passion to
Yes.
ultimately communication to then having empathy for others. Now, how has that leadership journey led you to leading an organization, and what are some key learnings you had there, or key takeaways you had in leading that
Well, I'll tell you,
organization?
the biggest one I learned was learning to delegate.
Mm,
So I was so bad. I'm like, I just know how to do it. Just let me do it. And I learned right away, like, my way isn't necessarily always the right way. However, I have learned a lot along the way. So anytime, hey, this is what I recommend, but I've had to learn to let go of my way and just trusting the delegation process and knowing that that person is well equipped, and if she's not or he is not equipped, they will ask questions. But for not for me to just quickly be like, no, give it back to me. I can do it. I've done it. This again goes back to a humble heart and just being a leader of knowing, hey, I make mistakes too. And sometimes when you start something, read Chariots for Hope. Jason and I start this, our blood, sweat, and
Oh yeah.
tears.
Oh yeah.
This is no paycheck for 2 years. It's your baby, you're protective. However, God has created amazing people with great skills and gifts and tools that I don't have. And so I need to believe and trust that I have brought this person up, I have led this person to the water. And now, because of those skills and things I've taught them, even though they might not do it the way I do it, they're getting the job done and they're doing it effectively. And I think that's a big one where people learning to delegate and sticking to it
Yeah, for sure.
is
I think,
important.
a lot of people see the step from others to organization. They don't realize it's not you doing more. It's you understanding who and what to delegate and when to delegate and how to hold accountable. And I think, through delegation as a simple, practical way to do that, say, I do, you watch, right? I'm sure that's the way you did it. We
Hmm.
do it together. And then you do, I watch, right? Instead of I'll keep doing it and you just keep watching, right? I think a lot of
Right.
leaders are like, here's delegation. You stand here. If I call for something, you bring it to me. If I'm asking for something and keep, it's a social engagement. I'm bored, so I need someone to talk to. No, that's not at all delegation. And so you have a definitive structure and timeline to delegate, and then you scale. And I think the outcome is the key for the objective. And so, what are some other key parts of that delegation that you found to be effective as you're delegating? Because I think a lot of leaders are stuck there.
Well, the biggest one is, if you didn't know, I co founded this with my husband.
Hmm.
And so, oh gosh, my lights went out. Anyway, I guess I need to move. Um, Jason and I've had to learn not only to be a wife, but to respect his leadership. And so being a
Mm.
co-founder in ministry with your spouse has been challenging. And we've learned a lot. With that, though, together as a powerhouse, his strengths are my weaknesses and my
Mm.
weaknesses are his strength, vice versa. And we play on that together. But I think in leadership, having co-founded something with somebody that's obviously my husband, is respecting the higher ups role. And I've had to really learn to do that. And I think because I've allowed Jason to lead and me respecting his decisions, we come together and make decisions. But I believe this ministry, because there are two hearts that are genuinely passionate about what we do, but me as a co-founder respecting his leadership role is
Mm.
crucial. And I think it's just building boundaries as well, building boundaries for within our home, that Chariots doesn't bleed everywhere, that
Mhm.
Jason and I protect our marriage, that, there's just a lot of things when it comes to working with your spouse as a co-founder. But that's a big one that I have learned and that I think has benefited the ministry, that Jason and I have been able to coexist and have that genuine respect for each other as leaders.
Well, we're going to be interviewing Jason, so we'll get his side of the story as well, because I think there's some parts of that too. And I did that intentionally, doing you guys separately, because you're co-founders, but you're also come from a different position of
Hmm.
strength and understanding at the same time. And I think that's critical too. Is especially when you're someone as passionate as you are. I mean, that could be when you're excited about something. I'm sure it's everyone knows,
They
and they
are.
know.
I feel so bad. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm the loudest in the room. Okay.
And everyone knows, and they might know all the time, right? Because I obviously have passion as a key part of mine, and I have to recognize that and temper that. And obviously being married and my wife not directly being involved in the business, there's times to let that and share that because on your heart. But she also knows that, hey, I've got to get it out of my system too. And so it's understanding that balance and that boundary. And I think as we delegate and as we do that, establishing boundaries, but also establishing responsibilities. I think that's key. As the two co-founders, you kind of
Crucial.
spoke to that. Is this is the area you operate in, this is the area he operates in. I think as we move from leading others to leading organization, it's really defining a role and then staying within that role, and then communicating when we step outside of that role. And I think one, it's the role that you're in compared to where Jason's in, number one. Number two is who's doing what. And hey,
Mhm.
let me refer to you, delegate over, send, hey, you know what, Jason be the great one to talk to about that, or someone else in the organization instead of me, even though I know the answer. Because if I provide the answer and step into that role, now I'm training you to ask me for a role that he's
Correct.
more equipped to do. And I think those
Correct.
are all things that as we lead an organization, we need to understand and carry forward. And so, what are some other key takeaways as you began to lead an organization that you think would be great as people are stepping from, that leading others? Maybe they've done a good job there, but they want to start their own organization or step into a role where they're leading an organization. What are some other things that you've learned, Michelle?
The biggest thing I've learned is relational. I mean, I know it
Mm.
sounds so easy, but this town is so relational. I have had to throw myself. So again, I stayed at home for almost 15, 17 years. I mean, I lost track. I didn't know how to network. I didn't know how to do these
Mm.
things. And networking is crucial. And it's believing in yourself to know that I could walk in a room, not know a soul, and introduce myself and share what I'm super passionate about and asking them to possibly come along and volunteer, to possibly come to an event or a blessing, to witness what I get to witness, right? And not doubting myself, just having the
Mm.
confidence to do so. But networking and building relationships has been a huge part of my leadership. Um, I know it sounds kind of elementary, but it's so, in business, you have got to be relational.
Mhm.
People want, you've got to be willing to listen. You've got to be willing to have, just to be, like you said, empathetic. And just don't underestimate somebody. I've learned that too. Just don't judge a book by its cover,
Sure.
and to really just, I don't know, meet people where they're at, whether it's on a networking side for the community development side, or if I'm walking into a room here at Chariots for a Bible study, to walk in with the same leadership and confidence in both arenas.
Yeah, and I think some people don't make that step of being relational when you're leading self, right? You're just leading yourself and you may relate to your family and they watch how you lead yourself. As you lead others, you're relating to your team,
Hmm.
right? And you may be relating to them and it's internetworked, et cetera, and you can make some inroads. But when you lead an organization, you need to relate to the cause
Yes.
and you need to draw people toward that. And I see people that network without purpose. And what do I
Mm.
mean by that? I just want to meet more people. For what? What
You
are you
want to pass
meeting them for?
cards. What does that mean? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna hand out cards so they know my name. No, that's how you meet people when you're in a social setting, not in an organizational setting. And so networking with a purpose. And so, I've been involved in a Chariots event. And so you're saying you're networking. Hey, I want to just invite you to the blessing. That's my purpose. I have a very
Yes.
clear, specific invite you to a blessing. Or maybe I want to get to know you and network to see if you need to or have a vehicle that you can donate to Chariots for Hope. Or maybe you're saying, hey, maybe you can just be someone that shares our message to somebody else, right? What is the purpose and that's what an organizational networker needs to understand. Here, I'm asking you for something specific and generally easy, right? It's a starting point, not a hey, donate $10 million our first meeting, right? It's progressive, and that's where as you lead an organization, you relate them to a cause, and then you ask them for something clearly and specifically. So any
Sometimes you don't even have
yeah,
to ask. It's so crazy.
right,
That's probably a big no-no. But I have learned not to be afraid to ask. The worst they can tell you is no. And as a leader, I have learned that. It's okay if they
mhm,
tell you no, and
right,
it's okay if they say yes. It doesn't change who you are, but it's actually built me, as far as the no's have built me better, I guess I should
yeah.
say. And because of the no's, I think I have become a better leader and just better understanding of, okay, that didn't work, but now this will work. And I think as young people are looking to be developed, it's okay to fail, and it's okay that people say no. Don't give up and keep going, because the next one can be a yes.
Well, and I think you kind of illuminated this a little bit, but asking lets you know where you're at.
Yeah.
And when you understand where you're at, you can make an adjustment. If the ask is a yes, then you know where you're at. If the ask is a no, then hey, maybe I didn't find the right audience, or this wasn't the right person, or maybe the timing's not right. There could be a yes later. But
Correct.
also, when you ask someone, just like I asked you here, you're showing value in them that you're
Yes.
requesting, especially how you ask. If you ask empathetically, clearly, and you communicate with authenticity, then people will, naturally communicate back, and there's no sense of obligation. But if you're asking with a ulterior motive, they will see that and that will be off-putting, right? And so
1000%.
that's what you're leading. So obviously you've done a phenomenal job, leading self, right? You started early on where you were serving in other capacities at a whether it's at the home or you're serving in a junior high ministry or and see leadership modeled early on as well. And then you started leading in the PTO, and then you began to lead others as you started at Chariots for Hope. And then, boom, here's this organization that's here, and you began to delegate and understand boundaries and broke those things open. and it continues to grow. But where do you see your leadership journey as we kind of wrap this up going from here, Michelle?
Where do I see my leadership going from here? Wow. I'm so, this is, I'm a day by day person. Jason's the visionary.
Understanding those roles again.
Oh my gosh, he says like 3 to 5 year plan. I'm like, oh. But it's so funny. I've learned now those 3 to 5 plans, those 3 to 5 year plans, those big, hairy, audacious goals is what he calls them, those BHAGs. I used to be so petrified of them.
Mm.
Now I've been more able to be like, okay, I can see that. That's doable. You know what I'm saying? Like I've learned to adjust that's so scary. And I'm not equipped to do that. Where now I'm like, oh yeah, we got this. I can do that. I see where he's going. So I feel like my leadership skills have obviously they've gotten better as I've learned along the way. Um, but I guess for me, it's just trying to identify more with him as the executive director because we are growing, Reed, and I'm not so much boots on the ground like I was. And so I'm learning how to maybe redefine my role as I don't want to say higher up. I really am not, but we are co-founders and it is growing organization. And so my boots on the ground, now we're going to implement those to other people and trusting that to where I can be a little bit more of, I can get out, whether it's across the country or doing things like this to share what I have learned. Versus being in the weeds of things. I hope that I don't know if that answered
Yeah,
the
for
question.
sure. I think that, your leadership journey, I've watched it. I think the impact you're going to have, I can continue to see Chariots for Hope making a difference. Again, I think it makes a difference on many fronts. And if you're listening and aren't familiar with Chariots for Hope, I encourage you to look that up. But first, one, I see it impacting those families that are getting a car. That's pretty obvious, right? That they have transportation, they can build their lives, and I've seen their reaction firsthand, right? And how that materially changed their life, but it also changed the person that's giving that vehicle, right? I mean, I know many of our franchisees have donated vehicles and they just feel better about using a resource for something that can be done for good instead of a couple $1,000s you can get at a low kind of a low return on an asset there. And then finally, you see those people that are watching your ministry and leadership and an impact in a broader community and saying, hey, there's people that can do good. We see so many bad things happening in life, but there are people that can out there. We can't affect the world, but we can affect our world and someone else's world. And so we start there. And so I think your leadership journey will continue to carry that forward. So as we close out, anything you want the audience to know, Michelle, as we have our final comment here?
I guess the biggest thing for me was I remember when God really burdened us with this mission. And Jason and I were at a crossroads. He left corporate America. He took on a small franchise. We were franchisee owners. That's what brought us to Nebraska, is to open up a franchise. And then a year and a half into it, we stepped away. And then we went into nonprofit. And so along the way, I guess if we didn't say yes, that's my thing. Don't be afraid to say yes. Don't be afraid of the naysayers because we were told multiple times, you guys are crazy. It's never going to work. Nobody's going to donate a car. And I remember we just stuck true to what God had called us to do. And if we were really truly in his will, if God had really made that clear to Jason and I, there's no better place to be. There's freedom in that. And I would just encourage people, although it may seem crazy or that really God's burdened you with something, don't ignore it. I call it, don't ignore the nudges. And don't be afraid of the no's. Again, and every person you meet along the way, somebody knows somebody that knows somebody.
That's
And
right.
don't underestimate a relationship. You just can't. I have learned over and over again. I've just been, I'll be like, no, that's not going to work, or that's not the kind of relationship. That's not. Don't judge a book by a cover. I mean, you just don't know. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Michelle, that's a great place to end is, hey, if you're in God's will, don't listen to naysayers and just say yes. And he will
Yeah.
lead you and guide you. I think that's awesome. And that's really, we appreciate you participating in the Next in Leadership, the interview, Michelle. It's been great to get to understand your story. And I'm excited to see what Chariots for Hope can do. And for those who are out there, just say yes to the opportunities and you'll be amazed at what you can learn, just like Michelle. Thank you. And we will see you next time.
Thank you, Reed.